The Romantic movement was a literary, artistic, and intellectual movement. It first began in Germany around the year 1770, and within a period of 50 years, it had spread all over Europe. The publication of the lyrical ballads in 1798, that's a seminal work. William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the lyrical ballads and its publication that year 1798 is a very, very important year. And the Romantic movement entailed a movement towards nature and the emotions, imagination. All these things are now going to hold sway. In fact, Coleridge gave a lot of importance to imagination, and he spoke of imagination in very, very different ways. He had a whole theory about it, in fact, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And Robert Burns, my love is like a red, red rose. He's the one who said that. And William Blake, these were the people who are recognized as the earliest writers of the Romantic era. And then we go on, of course, to the others, the five great Romantic poets. The senior poets were William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And then there is a difference of about, 2 decades, 20 years. Then you have the next three. You have Shelley, you have Byron, and you have Keats. And so these were the five great Romantic poets, and their poetry is something that, several poems that you'll have to go through. The Blue Stockings Society was begun in this Romantic age, and it was started by Elizabeth Montagu. Elizabeth Montagu was one of the founders here. So this Blue Stockings Society was essentially an informal literary group, and it planned to meet on a fairly regular basis and to have literary discussions. Both men and women were welcome, and there has been a lot of let's say several women writers belonged to this informal group known as the Blue Stockings group. Henry Fielding's sister, Sarah Fielding, she wrote a novel called David Simple. So she belonged to this group. Hannah More, she belonged to this group. Then you have Fanny Bernie. She's one of the most prominent women writers of this period. Fanny Bernie, she was known as Smollett in Petticoats. That name was given to her. And Fanny Bernie has written Evelina, which is a very famous novel. So these people belonged to this Blue Stockings group, basically a group for literary and scholarly minded people, and it is more associated with women writers since there were so many women participating in this at that time. Another thing pertaining to the Romantic period is there's a different set of periodicals that you have in this period. There was a different set in the earlier stage, and now there's a different set. So now you will have the Blackwood and the Quarterly Review, the Blackwood and the Quarterly Review, and the Blackwood and Quarterly Review that is going to spark off, the work Adonais by Shelley. So this review, this journal or magazine came out with bitter criticisms against some poets, and so the Blackwood and Quarterly Review. You have the Edinburgh Review, the Edinburgh Review, the Blackwood Review, the Quarterly Review separate. Then you have the London Magazine. All these are going to be, periodicals. The Westminster Review, Fraser's Magazine, the New Monthly Magazine. All this will form the periodical literature of this period. So the women writers of this period and these periodicals, and we'll have to remember Jane Austen, because Jane Austen is a very, very prominent woman writer who belongs to this period too. And of course, she has written several novels. She's written Pride and Prejudice, we've all heard of it. So she's written Emma, and there's an incomplete work called Sanderson. She's written Mansfield Park. And when you do post-colonial, when you study, post-colonial literature, etc., there will be a reference to Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. The Romantic Age is known for its essayists. There was a lot of prose writing, and there were a number of renowned essay writers in this period. You will have Charles Lamb, you will have William Hazlitt, you will have Thomas De Quincey, Leigh Hunt, and Walter Savage Landor. Charles Lamb wrote as Elia. There was a clerk at Southsea House, East India Company office, Southsea House. There was a man called Elia, and Charles Lamb was fascinated by the name Elia, and he took on that name as his pen name, and so we have the Essays of Elia. He and his sister Mary Lamb, there's a tragedy associated with her. Both brother and sister suffered a lot of depression and bouts of madness. But brother and sister, Charles Lamb and Mary Lamb, they edited the Tales of Shakespeare, and that's a very well-known work. So, Charles Lamb's Essays of Elia and Last Essays of Elia. So also Hazlitt, and when we come to William Hazlitt, he was, he began his career as a painter. He was a wonderful artist, and he went on to writing essays. He has written the English poets, the English comic writers, the dramatic literature of the age of Elizabeth. These are all the works of Hazlitt. He has written the Round Table, the Table Talk essays, the Spirit of the Age. These are Hazlitt's works. Then we come to De Quincey, who has written a very famous text called Confessions of an Opium Eater. I'd like to give you a short list of the poets and writers, the novel writers, the poets of the Romantic era who contributed to the field of drama, and this will be useful. For instance, we have William Wordsworth, who composed a blank verse tragedy. William Wordsworth wrote a lot of sonnets and lot of poetry on nature, but he has also written a blank verse tragedy called The Borderers. The Borderers, 1795-96. He was a poet and he wrote this blank verse tragedy called The Borderers. Next you have Coleridge. And Coleridge wrote a tragedy called Osorio, O-S-O-R-I-O. It had to be renamed Remorse. Remorse. It was renamed Remorse. Originally it was Osorio, but it was rejected. Sheridan of the Rivals fame. He was the manager at Drury Lane, the theatre, and he rejected it. So Coleridge had to revise the whole thing, revise Osorio, and then he brought it out as Remorse. Next we have Robert Southey, and he wrote Wat Tyler. It's a dramatic poem, a 2-act drama. He also wrote The Fall of Robespierre. Walter Scott is famous for his Waverley novels. Walter Scott wrote a drama called The House of Aspen. The House of Aspen. Then John Keats, who was a romantic poet, and in collaboration with Armitage Brown, Keats composed Otho the Great. These are all dramatic works that we are talking about. Shelley wrote The Cenci. It is considered to be one of the best tragedies since The Duchess of Malfi by Webster. Romantic poets contributing to drama. Byron, G.G. Byron, he wrote a number of blank verse tragedies. He wrote Manfred, he wrote Marino Faliero, he wrote The Deformed, Transformed. These are contributions by Byron. Then we come to Charles Lamb. He wrote a tragedy called John Woodville. So these are the contributions of the poets and writers of the Romantic period to the field of drama.